There it is. Thank you very much. So let's begin with our chalice lighting this morning. And please, the words are up on your screen. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in freedom, to speak the truth in love, and to help one another. And let me once again introduce Deb Keller-Wood. If you weren't here last week, Deb is our new Director of Spiritual Enrichment, and she will lead our Time for All Ages this morning.
Hello. I went on a hunt for stories. I'm new to this faith community, and I'm called to support our children and our youth and families and our adults. I was told that this group had chosen to bring a voice to a youth in their membership, to bring a youth to the parish committee. And I am told we have a youth who accepted that calling. This is a responsibility to all. The responsibility is to listen to the voice of youth and to hear what they have to say. I want to share with you the power of just two of many youth voices. They have followed their inner voice, and their message is powerful. Waka Smith, last year at the age of 18, was a senior at Verbum Day High School in Watts, California. He has joined other schools and community groups to demand that the University of California eliminate the SAT and the ACT for admission requirements. He said in an interview that it is no secret that today's youth will be leaders of tomorrow. However, they rarely are invited to a seat at the table. Youth's voices are not just often deliberately left out, they are unwillingly not allowed in. But young people have long played an intricate part in change making. The many youth-led protests of the civil rights movement are an example of this. A more recent example is how the Parkland students changed the gun debate. The future becomes more promising when those who will inherit the power are part of the discussion today. I also found out about a woman named Jackie Martinez. This young woman is a high school senior, and her voice is equally as powerful, but not as well known. She says, I grew up sharing a 1-bedroom apartment with my 5-member family in South Los Angeles. My parents, undocumented immigrants, had recently lost their jobs. We had no light, no gas, and lived on McChicken sandwiches. Because we had moved 1 month before the school year, I started 6th grade late. This did not make it easier to adjust to a new school, one of many inner city schools struggling with limited resources, safety concerns, and overcrowding. My high school was small with no traditional facilities, like a football field, a gym, an auditorium, and we did not have access to AP courses or many of the arts or STEM-related clubs. In 2011, my family and I faced what we would later regard as our greatest curse and blessing: foreclosure. I ended up living in garages for most of my life. My parents had to work tirelessly to find jobs during the financially and emotionally unstable times. At age 11, I began to work with my parents from 1 a.m. to 10 a.m. cleaning movie theaters to help alleviate their work burden. And I have worked every weekend and vacation since. These experiences made me a stronger person. When I face adversarial moments, I think about this period in my life. I have committed myself to foster change, to alter the conditions, not just for my family, but for those around me by doing the best I can with the resources at hand, as limited as they may be. During my high school years, I created a partnership program called Soaring Warriors, where my peers can assist teachers, tutors, mentors, and mentor middle school students to help foster community and empowerment. Following its success, I started Get Financially Lit, a program where I taught middle schoolers an 8-week curriculum on building financial literacy to help prepare low-income students of color for college and life. And in my senior year of high school, I served as the lead organizer for South Los Angeles's first youth TED Talks to expose my community to the concepts considered taboo or simply unspoken, including mental illness, digital currency, environmental justice, and diversity, all of which affected my community. The future is being rewritten by generations of youth innovators and the power to see what others don't. Think about what could happen once we equip these young innovators with the right tools. We all have voices, and that voice that we have is powerful. Let us remember to listen to the voices.
The first reading today, can you hear me?
Yes, we're all set, Karen.
Okay. The first reading today is by Parker Palmer. I was in my early 30s when I began literally to wake up to questions about my vocation. By all appearances, things were going well, but the soul does not put much stock in appearances. Seeking a path more purposeful than accumulating wealth, holding power, winning in competition, or securing a career, I had started to understand that it is indeed possible to live a life other than one's own. Fearful that I was doing just that, but uncertain about the deeper, truer life I sensed hidden inside me, uncertain whether it was real or trustworthy or within reach, I would snap awake in the middle of the night and stare for long hours at the ceiling. Then I ran across the old Quaker saying, "Let your life speak." I found those words encouraging, and I thought I understood what they meant. Let the highest truths and values guide you. Live up to those demanding standards in everything you do. So I lined up the loftiest ideals I could find and set out to achieve them. The results were rarely admirable, often laughable, and sometimes grotesque. But always they were unreal, a distortion of my true self, as must be the case when one lives from the outside in, not the inside out. I had simply found a noble way to live a life that was not my own, a life spent imitating heroes rather than listening to my heart. Today, some 30 years later, let your life speak means something else to me, a meaning faithful both to the ambiguity of those words and to the complexity of my own experience. Before you tell your life what you intend to do with it, Listen to what it intends to do with you. Before you tell your life what truths and values you have decided to live up to, let your life tell you what truths you embody, what values you represent. The second reading comes from this book by Francisco Alarcón. Reverend Art mentioned this book and read a poem by Francisco Alarcón in a service last month. I promptly ordered the book because it's bilingual. And if you know me, you know I love Spanish. So I'm reading this poem from the book, Body in Flames. Old song. Each of us carries in our chest a song so old we don't know if we learned it some night between the murmurs of fallen kisses. Our lips surprise us when we utter this song that is singing and crying at once.
Breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out. When I breathe in, I'll breathe out. When I breathe out, I'll breathe out love. When I breathe in, I'll breathe out. When I breathe out, I'll breathe out love. When I breathe in, I'll breathe in. When I breathe out, I'll breathe out love. When I breathe in, I'll breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I'll breathe out love. Breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out. When I breathe in, I'll breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I'll breathe out love. When I breathe in, I'll breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I'll breathe out love.
Good morning again. When I was growing up, I used to play all kinds of games with my brothers and other kids in the neighborhood. Sometimes cousins were visiting. I had a very close group of cousins. We didn't realize it at the time, but many of our games involved trying on different identities. We were lucky enough to have a large backyard and would recreate scenes from movies and characters from television shows that we'd seen. There were empty lots on either side of our house, and these became the scenes for many of our creative activities. We would collect all kinds of junk from the neighborhood to use as props and to build forts and sets for our stories. I imagine many of us did this as children. We wore many faces in those years. Some of it was play, and some of it was an attempt to discern who we are, to discern our identity, to figure out how we fit in the world. Well, and then there were the rebellious teenage years where I had this big bushy mop of hair that made my father angry all the time. That worked. And who can forget the brightly patterned polyester shirts, the big hair, and the big shoes of what I would call the disco era? I know I'm dating myself, but I'm not the only one who went through it, I'm sure. At that time, the inspiration for these different identities came from outside of me, outside of us. And many of us continue in some way or another to live our lives dictated by our perceived expectations of family and society. We didn't always have or use the capacity for inner reflection and discernment. That was often too frightening, perhaps. Rather than trying to see what felt right from the inside, we go instead with what was acceptable to our families and friends. And perhaps this works for a while, but then life begins to have a hollow feeling. We can become unhappy, depressed, angry, and miserable when we're not living our true identities. We lose a sense of meaning and value when we find ourselves living out other people's expectations of who we should be. At some point in our lives, it's important to look within and ask, what is within me waiting to be born? Who and what am I called to be in this world? As an adult, I have learned, sometimes painfully, that the process of discerning who I am and how I am in the world must be more of an inner journey. In order to be happy and whole as an adult, I can't just try on different identities, different values, different ways of being that I get from outside of myself, from other people. I shape my identity based on values and practices that are internally motivated, that now come from within the deepest parts of my being. Gerald Jampolsky writes, as a child, I was told and believed that there was a treasure buried beneath every rainbow. I believed it so much that I have been unsuccessfully chasing rainbows most of my life. I wonder why no one ever told me that the rainbow and the treasure were both within me. How many rainbows have you had to chase before learning to look within to find your own treasure? How disconnected are you? Are we from our own authentic selves and from more authentic ways of being? When we're disconnected from our authentic selves, when we adjust our thinking and actions to conform with some ideal or expectation that is outside of us, we experience profound alienation. Our behavior becomes skewed, isolated, and inconsistent with our own values. In the book, Let Your Life Speak, which Karen quoted from in our first reading, Parker Palmer tells of his own alienation from himself as he tried to conform and mold his life after ideals that weren't his own. In one of the more amusing stories, he relates how he was offered the opportunity to be president of a small educational institution. After visiting the campus and speaking with students, faculty, and trustees, he was certain that this was the job for him. As is the custom among Quakers, and Parker Palmer is a very prominent Quaker teacher, he called together a handful of trusted friends to help him do a deeper discernment around this wonderful new job offer. In the process, it's called a clearness committee. The group refrains from giving advice, but spends 3 hours asking honest, open-ended questions to help the person discover his or her own inner truth. Palmer reports that at first the questions were easy till about halfway into the process, someone asked, "What would you like most about being president?" That question stumped him. He didn't know how to respond. He started with a whole litany of things he would not like about the job. Well, there would be giving up his writing and teaching, the politics of being president of a school, and having to glad hand people and encourage them to donate money to the school, having to give up summer vacations, having to wear a suit and tie all the time. A couple of times the questioner tries to draw him back to the original question. There's some silence, and in a very small voice, he says the only reason he can think of for really wanting to take this job. I guess what I'd like most is getting my picture in the paper with the word president under it. Consequently, of course, he did not take that job. How do we get ourselves into these situations? We make major life choices based on fortune and fame, societal expectations, even sometimes on a desire to do good. But if our motivation doesn't come from a calling deep within, then in the words of this morning's reading, the results are rarely admirable, often laughable, and sometimes grotesque. I don't know about you, but there have been a few times in my life when a clearness committee would have served me well and saved me from a lot of embarrassment, hardship, and pain. Now, looking within, searching our thoughts and feelings, looking for our true inner voice and the call of the Spirit might, for many of us, be more complicated right now because of the coronavirus pandemic and the political mess and turmoil that our country is in. We are living in times where we feel kind of traumatized regularly. When I start looking at myself these days, I sometimes see fear or discomfort or loneliness, feelings of being overwhelmed, and even sometimes a bit of depression. Some of us may just be getting by day to day, putting one foot in front of the other and not planning too far ahead because we're not sure what's coming. At the same time, this pandemic and political chaos can also give us the motivation and the courage to live our lives more fully, to speak more clearly from a place of greater clarity and authenticity. There's nothing like a good crisis to reorient ourselves. Sometimes it does take a crisis to motivate us to change our lives and take authentic risks to stay true to ourselves. This can be true for us personally, but also as an institution, as a religious organization. Rob Hardy's was the senior minister of All Souls Church in Washington, D.C., one of our premier UU congregations. He was there when 9/11 happened. As you can recall, the Pentagon was also attacked along with the Twin Towers in New York. This became a call to reawaken his congregation to a deeper and more profound way of being with each other and involvement in the larger community. Consequently, All Souls ended up hosting the memorial service some weeks later for the postal workers that had been killed by the poison that was sent through the mail. What is the authentic call of our souls, individually and collectively? I remember the first sermon I ever preached. It happened when I was a member of the UU Society of Northampton and Florence, Massachusetts. I had been involved in the welcoming congregation class, and because I had started talking about going to seminary, I was asked to preach about my story growing up as a gay man. It was a challenging story to tell. Yet when I stepped up to that pulpit for the first time, I had this sensation of roots coming out of my feet and sinking through the floor and into the ground below. A surge of nourishment and strength filled my being. And I knew for certain in that moment that ministry and preaching were my calling. I was reminded of this story this week by my yoga instructor, Jen Shannon, who's a member of the UU Church in Provincetown. Thank God for Zoom yoga. In our Zoom class last week, she led us on a meditation that I'd like to share a variation of with you. I'd like to invite everyone to sit comfortably and use your breathing to relax your body and clear your mind of worries and concerns. Then gently close your eyes if you can, or take them off the Zoom screen, lower them to the floor or a point on the wall somewhere. Imagine a favorite tree that you love to look at, a tree that gives you a sense of the strength and the beauty of life. Now imagine that you are that tree. Feel your roots sinking deeply into the ground, both to gather nourishment and to stabilize and strengthen your body and your being. Feel your arms like branches reaching up to the sun and the rain. Feel your fingers as leaves, gathering nourishment and offering shade to other beings and other creatures. Realize that as this tree, you have seen many seasons. You know wind and rain. You've been caught in blizzards. You've known the heat of many summer suns. And you've known glorious days. Think about how you and this tree have persevered. You know how to be tall and strong. You know that you are able to withstand much hardship, pain, and turmoil if you have the right roots and the right nourishment. Like this tree, you can have a longer view of history and time than just this present moment. Now take a moment to thank your tree for the gifts that it has given you, and return to us in the service. Part of the love and support that holds this community together offers us a chance to serve as a clearness committee of sorts for each other and for our work together. It's not our job to give advice, but to ask open-ended questions that help all of us to discern our deepest calling and truest identity in the world. Together, we can help each other listen deeply and find our true voice. Together, we can discern our mission at First Parish in Plymouth. Amen, and blessed be. Please join in singing our closing hymn. The slides will appear on the screen, and it's This Little Light of Mine.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Building up a world, I'm gonna let it shine. Building up a world, I'm gonna let it shine. Building up a world, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
The last line of our reading this morning is what I would like to use for our benediction. From Parker Palmer, he writes, "Before you tell your life what you intend to do with it, listen for what it intends to do with you. Before you tell your life what truths and values you've decided to live up to, let your life tell you what truths you embody and what values you represent." We're now going to end the recorded portion of our service a bit early because we have a recorded postlude for all of us. So please sit back and listen and enjoy this beautiful song